You've said today that this announcement from New South Wales aligns with global capital market realities. I guess a similar sentiment to what the Treasurer said last Friday. Does it, in a way, does it make it less relevant what the federal government does if the states are being as ambitious as this? Does it sort of override that federal policy in a way?
No, not really, because critically, for institutional investors, they're exposed to climate change right across the economy and right across the nation. So having a unified approach across and bipartisan approach across the Commonwealth is absolutely really critical to supporting the investments that investors want to make in clean energy projects in Australia. And it's also really important in terms of how we project ourselves internationally, because global financial institutions are now actually assessing countries at a macro level about whether they're prepared to take on and invest in those countries because of climate change risk. By not signalling ambition on the pathway to net zero by 2050, you're essentially sending a signal to capital markets globally that you're not interested in attracting the trillions of dollars that are available for new clean industries.
So in terms of the gap between Australia's midterm targets, the 2030 targets, which we've seen from Matt Keane and the New South Wales government, that ramped up significantly, how big is that gap between where the Australian national target is and what you argue is the mainstream global investor practice?
Well, if you look at the Australian target, which of course at the moment is a 26% reduction on 2005 levels by 2030, you then can quite easily compare that to what is the average emission reduction that other countries or our peers or major allies are committing to. And at the moment, with all the updates we've seen from stronger targets from the US, from the UK, from Europe, from Japan, means that the average is about a 45% reduction across our peers. And there's a big gap between 26% and 45%. And indeed, if you look at what the states have committed to across Australia, so we've got commitments from New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, South Australia on 2030 targets, and that the average of those commitments is indeed around a 45% reduction. So you can see the gap that's emerging between the signals that state governments, companies, and the international community are sending and the gap is growing between where Australia's current commitment is and where the rest of the global economy is going.
Erwin, just finally, where is Australia's projections when it comes to 2030? Where are the projections for emissions at the moment? If we put the target, 26 to 28% to one side, where are we headed anyway? Aren't we going to beat those numbers, that threshold?
Well, it'll be really interesting to see the government's projections, which we're expecting soon, on what the current policy framework is delivering. With additional actions from the states, as we've seen today, you could imagine if you added up all the state commitments and they achieved them, Australia would be on a track to anywhere between a 35 and a 45% reduction by 2030. We're seeing technology costs increasing. We're seeing decarbonisation of sectors as we're seeing some investment in renewable energy in Australia. So I think we can be confident that Australia is on track to achieve currently more than we're currently saying we are, and that provides us with an opportunity to lift our ambition and join our global trading partners and peers in attracting the capital that's going to be needed to achieve net zero emissions.